So I saw the Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi. I won't spoil it if you haven't seen it yet and still want to. I'll just say that there's some consternation, if you will, among the longtime Star Wars fans because there are some lines that are not as clearly drawn as they might prefer. Maybe like there's some coloring outside of the lines. Maybe that's a better metaphor. I don't know. One of the characters, it's Luke Skywalker, says at one point, "This is not going to go how you think, or how you think it will." So yeah, that basically describes the consternation of the longtime fans. Things in the movie didn't go how they thought they would. Personally, I kind of like it when things like that happen, when things don't go in a movie how I thought, maybe even sometimes in real life. Oh cool, look at that. I totally missed how that was going to go. How wrong was I? Things didn't go how I thought. Neato, gang! I've come to understand that many, maybe most other people in the world aren't quite so okay when things don't go as we thought. But back to Star Wars, there's still some things that do go how you think. There's still good guys and bad guys. There's lightsabers and there's the Force, and there are stormtroopers. You know stormtroopers, the guys in the white armor with the masks, the faceless masks? They're soldiers. They're scary because there are a lot of them, and they march in with that metallic kind of sound, the look and the sound and the instant feeling of power, imperial power. You need them in a Star Wars movie. They're an essential part of it. When they show up, it's like, okay, we know that the unstoppable power is here, the evil empire is here, innocents are about to be slaughtered, atrocities are about to be committed, and we, the good guys, are going to fight back. We're going to fight against it. This is a thing that works in our epic stories, all of them. It's necessary because we're familiar with it. Throughout human history, these stormtroopers really do show up in Mesopotamian towns and in African villages and in occupied colonies and in European cities and in third world hamlets over and over and over again. Here comes the empire. Here comes their stormtrooper army. The shepherds were among the descendants, the remnant of the people of Israel, the Israelites. Really, they were the most marginal of the remnant of the Israelites. Did you catch what the text says? In that region, there were shepherds living in the fields. Maybe you remember the old King James, they were abiding in the fields. How old-fashioned and classy, they were abiding. Nice try, English. That means they lived there. They lived in the fields. They were without shelter. They were homeless. They camped out in the fields with the flocks and the herds that belonged to other people, wealthy people. And in exchange for keeping the predators away and keeping the sheep from blundering into the river, they probably got to eat. Almost certainly, they didn't get any more than that. But still in all, they, the shepherds, were, even if they were the dregs, they were still the descendants of the Israelites. They shared the sense of self and place and special blessedness, chosenness that those people did. Israel had never been a big kingdom, and for most of its history that could even be defined as kingdom, it had been a divided kingdom. But even now, in ruin and dregs, the descendants still remembered that they'd had a king once. They'd been a place once. They'd been great once. They fought many battles against many stormtroopers. And they remembered that their prophets told them that they would again. Because they had. The Old Testament is filled, overstuffed with stories of war and invasion and vengeance and overthrow. And if we can vaguely remember some of those stories from Sunday school, well, imagine how real and vivid and just like yesterday they were to these first century kids living in a field, the descendants of the Israelites. I say Luke Skywalker, and most of you, maybe not all, but most of you go, oh yes, right, obviously, Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knight, or whatever. Some of you can probably even quote, I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you. Well, if you said Gideon to one of these shepherds, they would go, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. You say Samson to them, and they'd be like, they'd feel it in their bones, the power to slay the enemies at the right hand and at the left, and to even pull their houses down on top of them. You say to them, David Well, David. City of David. House of David. Son of David. David. We had a king once. And guess what? Someday we will again. David, the most famous of all the adventure stories, that time when we beat back the empire. They liked that one because it was about winning, and they lost a lot. Most of their stories were about losing. The imperial armies of Aram and Babylon, Tyre and Philistia, Assyria and Persia, just a few of the empires that had stormed into the land of the Israelites, defeated their heroes, slaughtered their innocents, razed their cities, killed their kings. And that's not to mention, of course, the big one, Rome, the most powerful and imperial of all empires, the one that held sway now, the one that was undefeated and undefeatable. That was their history, the history of defeat. But those Israelite shepherds probably would have said, we fought back. We fought against it. We are still here, and I'll tell you a secret. I'll tell you why we are still here. It's because God is on our side. You and I, have heard that before. We like to say it. For God himself fights by our side with weapons of the Spirit. Human beings like to say that. One of the most horrific terrorist organizations of the last 20 years, committers of unspeakable atrocities, named themselves the Lord's Resistance Army. God fights on our side. They, it should be noted, are avowedly Christian. The Israelites had a historic name for this God, the God who fights on our side. They called the name of that God was the Lord of Hosts. This name is repeated 235 times in the Old Testament, the Lord of Hosts. The Lord of Hosts is with us. Who are these hosts? What does that mean exactly? They're angels. Not cutesy little halo cherub angels. They're avenging angels. They're warrior angels. God himself fights on our side, the Israelites said, with hosts, heavenly hosts, warrior angels. Maybe they'd admit this hasn't been fully realized yet. We've lost a lot of battles to a lot of empires, but we've won more than we should have, given how small we are. We won with Gideon. We won with David. We didn't win with Samson, but we took a lot of them out with us. Over and over again throughout the history, the protection of the Lord of Hosts, the God of the angel armies, has kept us safe, said the Israelites. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And even if things didn't always quite work out for the Israelites in the past, in history, well, they could tell you that they dreamed, some of them dreamed, of a day when the Lord of hosts would sweep in with angel armies, place them, God's people, safely in a remote location, and then use the avenging angel armies to destroy all of their enemies while they watched. That sounds familiar to me. Does anybody today dream of that kind of day? Of God's terrible vengeance upon the enemies of the stormtroopers, the ultimate victory of the Lord's resistance army of death-dealing angels? No way, right? That would be horrific. That would be not Christian. Anyway, angels, super scary, dealers of destruction and death. They'd slain thousands of Egyptians. Remember the Passover story. They'd slain hundreds of thousands of city dwellers. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah, pillar of salt. They'd passed through enemy camps with pestilential death. They barred the way when God said, "You shall not pass this way." They carried flaming swords. They burned lots of things with fire. They were bad, bad, bad news, pretty much, wherever they appeared. And lo, one of them had just appeared to the shepherds. It was not up in the sky like it's often depicted. The text says that it appeared suddenly right in front of them on the ground. Lo, an angel. And then suddenly there appeared with the angel a multitude of the heavenly hosts, God's soldiers, God's terrifying angel army. If you're a shepherd and you know your Israelite history, well, do not be afraid, actually. This is not going to go the way that you know, the way that you think that it's going to go. The most beautiful and subversive thing about the Christmas story is that God's angel army, terrifying, destructive power of God, comes into the world, invades the creation, and they are singing a song about peace. Against the whole tide of history, against all of the angriest and deservingest prayers and dreams of people who had been hurt and broken and wanted vengeance, wanted God to come in and smite, against all of the violence and the certainty and the wishes for victory of the human heart. God's army comes, finally, to announce peace. Be afraid, no. Do not be afraid. Bad news, fake, no. I bring good news. Despair, no. Great joy. Get rid of them, no. This is for all people. The Christmas messengers, God's angel army, bring a song, a message of peace. Do you want to be one of them? All you have to do is to speak hope to the hopeless, to share peace, to live peace in the midst of the surrounding violence, to show love to a world that wants to reject love as too weak, too vulnerable, not valuable. All you have to do is listen again, think again, learn again, be penitent again. And then after that, speak and act. It starts with wanting God's promises to be true, wanting there to be peace, wanting everyone to have enough, wanting love to be the rule and the judge and the order. And this must be said, it starts with not wanting enemies to be destroyed, with not wanting there to be winners and losers, with not hoping and praying for God's wrath to be visited upon somebody, anybody. God's Christmas messengers are not proclaiming any of those things. Those who claim that they are telling us lies. Because the truth that we read and we know is that God's Christmas messengers are invading the world to wage peace, to set out the battle plan of joy, to take the towns and the cities and the hills and the dales and the whole wide world with love. Do you hear them? Even now, do you hear them? Are you listening? Can you hear the angels sing?